It's Jen Rollich here if you're watching on YouTube, and welcome back to the Brains and Waynes podcast if you're listening on there. This is actually my third attempt at filming this. I got 40 minutes into the last one and my camera cut out unexpectedly, I think because of overheating. That's what Google told me. So I do have my window open because this room that I'm in is tiny and overheats pretty quickly. So if there is some background noise picked up in the mic, I apologise. But today I'm talking about a really important subject, so I've decided to refilm it to make sure that I'm succinct and that I get my points across clearly and directly, because this is not the kind of subject that I want to leave anything up for incorrect interpretation, because today I'm going to talk about the manosphere that exists inside the fitness industry and the contribution that the fitness industry makes to the manosphere as a whole. Now, this is a controversial topic and subject. There might be opinions that I share in this that you disagree with. That's fine. If you are open to having a genuine conversation and understanding more, and you want to ask me questions on my perspective, please wire in. I studied gender at university level, so I understand this from a theoretical perspective, and I also bring in anecdotal and personal examples as well as scientifically conducted research. So I bring a variation of viewpoints to this, including my own opinion. It is absolutely fine for you to disagree with me if you want to have a conversation about it. If you just want to come in and attack and be a clown, like, wire in, but you're going to be shouting into the void. I've wanted to talk about this for quite a long time because I wanted to talk about sexism in the fitness industry. This to me is a whole separate issue. This to me is the manifestation of years and years of ignored systemic sexism, and actually what happens when we ignore it. We ignore small things so much that they become the mountain, because we never paid attention to the molehill. So I'm going to talk about my perspective on the Louis Theroux documentary and how I see the fitness industry's responsibility for creating and perpetuating it, but also what I believe are the ways out of it. So first thing I want to say, big disclaimer here, is when I talk about men, I am not talking about all men, okay? I am talking about men as a social construct. I am not directly attacking you as an individual man. You might go, but I don't do those things and I don't say those things. It doesn't matter. You still make a collective contribution to just by the fact that you're a man, okay? So you have to accept that. If you disagree with that, I mean, it's factual, but if you disagree with that and you're not on board with that, then that's okay. I hope that you still listen and be open to having your perspective changed, because it's most important that men listen to this above all other people. So first thing that I think that we need to address about this whole thing, right, is that patriarchy is rife in this industry, right? This industry depends on patriarchy. You're going to also see me looking at my phone if you're watching on YouTube. I've written down points and statistics so that I don't waffle, basically. So if you see me looking down at my phone, that's what I'm doing. I'm getting my talking points. So that's the first thing that I want to talk about. Patriarchy is the petrol of capitalism, right? And patriarchy exists and functions as an arm of capitalism, right? Capitalism is dependent on patriarchy to exist. And what we have to understand is that when patriarchy is dependent on capitalism to function, exploitation needs to be part of it to keep that balance going, right? So what I mean by that is capitalism can only be successful if someone is being exploited, right? And this exists very heavily inside of the fitness industry, okay? What we need to look at here is that when we look at the fitness industry as a whole, mentors have been exploiting coaches for years, right? Mentors for years have been taking coaches' money, promising them like huge, incredible results, life-changing transformations that people have never ever gotten. A lot of people feel like they were promised and sold a dream. They put in the work, they never got the result. The mentor took more money off them, promised them that they would get it if they just kept working harder, kept working harder. That is capitalism in action, people, right? The promise that if you keep working hard, you'll get it, and it's you not working hard enough that's not getting you the thing, as opposed to the system being set up in a way that you remain dependent and don't actually ever get to where you think you're going to go, right? That has been happening in the fitness industry for a long time now. And those mentors do that in the pursuit of gaining their own personal wealth. It's an individualistic concept. They don't actually care about anything more than the money that they can make from you, okay? That is their number one objective. So that's the first thing that we have to bear in mind. What then happens is that fuels a cycle where coaches, in order to meet that demand, they have to exploit people underneath them, which are prospects. So coaches have found themselves moving away from passion and drive and commitment to their craft into becoming marketing experts to amass as many leads as possible, convert as many as possible into clients, and using the same forceful, pressureful sales tactics on other people that were used on them, being told that generating money, generating capital, generating wealth is the number one most important thing. So people have got prospects putting $2,500 up front on a credit card and saying worry about it later, and if you pay like this it shows that you're more committed to your goals. They've got people signing up for coaching who actually need therapy and leaving them in a worse off position because it was all in the name of closing the sale, getting more leads, making more money, amassing more wealth, right? So we have to recognise that the fitness industry very much already runs on this capitalistic model of exploitation, and patriarchy is a huge part of that, okay? What we have to consider here is that when you contribute to that, when you're a part of that, right, and we're all a part of it, like simply by existing in this industry means that we're a part of it, and we all have to live and exist in a capitalist society, and to live and exist in it you have to subscribe to it, you have to be a part of it, meaning that we all end up going along with these same things, but nobody really stops to question the negative impact that this is having over time, right? What we've seen happen is that we see coaches who've then bought into this ideology of just making more money lose all sense of morals, values and passion, and make absolutely insane ethical decisions because they lose all sense of morality. There's no compass for right and wrong. It's every man for themselves, fucking survive, make your cash and forget about everybody else, right? And what it is a drive towards individualism in what was once a collective space. A lot of pockets of the fitness industry were founded on collectivism, the same way that a lot of components of the communities that we live and grow and work in were founded in collectivism. And I think that people who once found their way into this industry from a collective place like a gym, right, a shared space for people who had a shared passion and purpose, have now found themselves as the solo online coach in this individualistic mindset, thinking only of themselves, their business, what they want, without any understanding of or any recognition of the people around about them and the contribution they're making to the wider system itself, right? And that's exactly what we've seen happen with those young men in that documentary, and what we see happen is more and more and more with young men. They become more and more isolated because there are not these same communities that once existed, that like existed when I was growing up. So I grew up in a working class community where everybody knew each other. I went to school in the town that I grew up in. I went through the primary school and high school with the same people, with my neighbours, my peers, my friends. If we knew each other, the neighbours had a key for your house, they would feed your cat and water your plants when you went on holiday. We grew and existed in community spaces. There were community centres, extracurricular activities, youth groups, youth club, community organisations. There were so many things that were rooted in building a strong and stable and safe and thriving community, but that isn't a vehicle for capitalism. So these things no longer exist. Funding gets stripped and stripped and stripped and stripped so much that these services can no longer exist, and that leaves young people in a position where they need to find community elsewhere. And naturally, with the development of technology, young people have found community in online spaces, but the difficulty with these online spaces is that it's unfiltered access. So young people can spend extended periods of time in these online spaces with no limitation, right? No time, like it's not like this is over now and you need to go home. They spend time in them all the time, and a distinct and clear thing for me from that documentary was that all of these young men, the common denominator was that they didn't have strong, positive male role models in their lives to look up to, and fractured relationships with either their mothers or their fathers. And I think that what we have to recognise is that when those young people then don't have alternative role models, so if they don't have a father or a mother who can role model for them, where else do they look for that role modelling? If they're not in community spaces, if they're not if they don't have aspirational men to look towards them, to guide them, to teach them, they have to then look elsewhere for that. And when they're in that vulnerable state, as all young people are, as they go through the natural transition of finding themselves and developing an identity, they're so vulnerable. These people prey upon that vulnerability, right? And that's exactly what happened to so many of these young men, and why they buy into this ideology, even though it keeps them in this position that they're stuck in, because it doesn't actually support them or benefit them. It puts everything back onto them, the individual, right? When actually we need to look at the collective responsibility that we have in the fitness industry and the contribution that we are making to this, right? Because what I found really, really interesting is that fitness is a core element of the Manosphere. So fitness is one of their pillars of success. All of those guys, you see them all training and going to the gym, they're all in shape, and they see that as a component of what they would describe as a high value man, in inverted commas, because that phrase makes me feel ill, right? So they value that as a component of what makes a man, and so does the fitness industry. So many of you that I know, especially male coaches, pride and value themselves and believe that a huge component of their masculinity is built on their physique, right? And what I find really interesting is that that was once a very positive thing that's now been warped into the purpose of it has changed. I think for a lot of male coaches who are my age, like in their 30s or older, will understand that the focus on fitness and physique has changed significantly over the years, and the reasons why people train now will be very different to how they would have been previously. Back in the day, it was all for aesthetics. They're obviously people who were into fitness did it for more than just the aesthetic, but if you were into fitness, you were different, right? Like, you were someone who was into fitness, whereas now everybody's into fitness. It's a really common, like, shared thing that people do. It's no longer a uniqueness of your personality. So, and then you'll get a lot more people now who use exercise as a vehicle to support their mental well-being, right? It's not like this, sorry, my hair's caught my microphone. It's not this thing that people just do now for an aesthetic outcome. However, when we see a push back towards that, notice the place that fitness is spoken about for these young men from those people, right, in that documentary, or those men that they look to for inspiration. It's spoken towards them as a requirement. You are not going to be accepted unless you have this, as opposed to, here's the reasons why fitness is majorly beneficial to you and your life, right? It's you need to have this. This is no longer a desirable asset. This is a baseline requirement to be an accepted member of society. That puts a whole different level of pressure on to young men. And I think that when we look at the role that fitness plays inside of the Manosphere, fitness is a vehicle into these beliefs for a lot of those young men, right? They see how these men that they aspire to be are behaving. They watch their routines, they watch the things that they engage in, that they spend time in, how they speak about fitness, and they emulate what is important to those men. They say, you have to be in shape or a woman will never speak to you, right? And if you want to be like me and have all of these women who I can manipulate and control, you have to be in shape. That's the easiest to access vehicle. If they don't have cash behind them to invest in whatever bullshit these guys are selling, fitness is the easiest accessible vehicle into that. And when we're talking about like community spaces that young people are spending time in, for example, one of the few community spaces that young people are actually going out and engaging in, as far as I'm aware, right, bear in mind I look at this through my context, I don't know a lot of young people, it's the gym, right? When I go to a commercial gym, whenever I go to the gym, it's full of young people. You were different if you went to the gym when I was younger. A lot of people played sport, and playing sport was always a normal thing, but going to the gym wasn't really we wouldn't hang about in the gym. Like, me and my pals when we were younger would hang about like community spaces, or we would go down the woods drinking, right? So it's a good thing that kids are spending time in the gym, and that's a place that they congregate and that they meet. But that then means that fitness becomes a vehicle into those things, when actually fitness should be a vehicle out of those things. What I feel we are missing are strong, positive male role models in those spaces to say, this is the positive side of fitness and how it benefits masculinity, not toxic hyper masculinity that's a vehicle to being a fucking incel, right? But actually the kind of masculinity that upholds the standards and principles that you have as a man, that helps you to play the roles in your life better as a husband, as a father. Those are the male role models that we don't have enough of for those young men, right? And I think that this is the thing that I want all male coaches to consider, is how present are you as an aspirational role model in these young men's lives? And I'm not just talking the young people in your life, I'm talking from a societal perspective. Like, do they have enough of those men to look up to that it's an alternative to then going on YouTube and seeing those people as aspirational, right? I think that when we think about the fitness industry as a whole, I said before, like, the fitness industry is dependent on patriarchy to survive. And I think that's something that a lot of men underestimate, because there'll be men who listen to this and they go, yeah, but I'm not like that and I would never do that and I am a role model, right? But what you don't realise is that you make a contribution to this even when you don't think that you do. Everyday sexism is something that myself and many female colleagues in this industry and beyond experience every single day. For my entire career, I have had men speak over me, interrupt me, say what I have just said, but that's fallen in deaf ears, but then they say it a different way and everybody goes tonto for it. I've had many, many men take my concepts, my ideas and my work and put their own name against it. Like, this has happened to me consistently for my whole career because I am a loud woman, right? And weak men don't like loud women. I will speak, I will say it, I will not shut up, I will not make your life easier. I will not intentionally make it more difficult, but I will not shrink or silence myself or make myself smaller to make you feel more comfortable. And I'm a huge threat to this ideology that men perpetuate. So I get branded as difficult if a man is passionate and assertive, he's passionate and assertive. If I'm passionate and assertive, I'm angry and aggressive, right? If a man is direct and authoritative, he's direct and authoritative. If I do it, I'm bossy, right? There have been so many occasions over the years with my business partner, Mark, where there are men who have come into we've worked in various businesses together over the years. There have been countless men who have come into those businesses and just refused to engage with me completely. They will say that they don't need me or my expertise, when in actual fact they do, but they disregard it because I'm a woman. They go, do you know what, she does the emotional side of things and I don't really need that. We still have men to this day who come to work with us and they don't direct disrespect me. Mark wouldn't be accepting of that, but the everyday sexism is present in the fact that they will bypass me to speak to him. Granted, there are things, we have different expertise, there are things more within his expertise that they would rather speak to him about. Absolutely, there are many things that I can support them with that they will bypass me to go and speak to him about, because they would much rather just speak to the guy, right? That's an example of everyday sexism, and this harms women so much in so many different ways, in ways that you wouldn't even imagine. I put out a reel last year about sexism in the fitness industry, and I asked women to share their examples of everyday sexism in the comments, and I get some really great shares. Emily shared with me that a male director of a gym that she worked in stopped talking to her after she named her business the Women's Empowerment Movement. His reasoning was that my name would have sufficed, and he lost respect for me for making things more complicated than they needed to be by rebranding. So how interesting is that wording? More complicated than it needs to be. It makes him uncomfortable, right? Therefore, you're overcomplicating it. And men do this all the time. They apportion blame towards the woman on their perception of what she is doing, right? You're blowing this out of proportion. You're being too emotional about this. This isn't that big a deal, right? When in actual fact, it's easier to blame the woman because that's patriarchy than it is to stop and consider, why is this making me uncomfortable? The concept of female empowerment doesn't mean male disempowerment, right? Both can coexist, but that doesn't support the power structure that men need to live and exist in. Therefore, they see it as threatening, right? Same guy would hit my clients during the sessions while he was topless. Surprise, surprise. Simple things, right, that men don't disregard but overlook because they just don't consider it. They have never lived in our reality. There are the obvious things like being able to go out a run on your own and not be worried. I've never ever been able to be on a run on my own without both earphones in and without a tool in my run vest in case I'm attacked, right? Because that is a harsh reality. Women are attacked in broad daylight all of the time, right? So that's a reality with which we need to live, that we need to consider. You never need to do that. You never need to worry about how you're getting home. I hear this argument from men sometimes that's like, yeah, but a guy could easily just jump me on the street, right? The likelihood of that happening to you is far lesser than it happening to me, but you don't need to worry about what happens after that, right? You might be at risk of getting mugged. You don't need to worry about how that mugging's going to end up. Imagine you are walking down the street, right? And you think that every single guy you're walking past might mug you. Imagine how that feels. That's the reality of a woman in her life every single day. We need to consider the dangers of men against us in situations where we should never have to, but that is just our lived reality. You might be a man who would never dream or consider of doing that, but we don't know. We don't know if you're a man who would do that or who wouldn't do that, so we need to assume that you will until we are proven that you won't. Emily said, I've seen some gyms store equipment 30 kilogram or heavier, well over the height of the average woman to reach. This has happened to me so many times in the gym where I've been sharing equipment or been in a group workout by a guy who's loaded the bar really heavily and then just left the weight on the bar. And then I need to go through the process of, do I ask for help, right? And get that help from someone who can actually help me. That makes me feel quite vulnerable that I then need to actually go and ask for that help, right? Because I don't want to have to ask for that help, or do I risk an injury of pulling this weight off the bar? Personally, I go for the biggest guy in the room. Whenever I need help in the gym, I go straight for the bodybuilders. The biggest guy in the room is often the nicest because he's got nothing to prove. So there's a tip if you're ever a female in the gym. And then there's those situations where you're lifting weight and men ask if you want help with the weight that you're already lifting, right? Why would I want help with the weight that I'm already lifting? It's just an example of everyday sexism. It's a criteria. I'm not going to take this weight off the bar in consideration of you, but if there's an opportunity for me to approach you, right, and make you feel uncomfortable, I'm going to take it. Most equipment is fit based on an average sized male. This is a really interesting one. I used to play American football. None of the pads ever fit me because American football pads are designed for the male body. I have breasts, so American football pads don't come down fully over me, meaning I was always playing in ill-fit equipment and actually snapped my humerus in 3 places. And I don't think that would have happened if my equipment had been fit properly, because it would have come down enough that this part would have been protected, and it couldn't because it couldn't come down over my chest properly. They do make female American football equipment, and the shoulder pads are roughly 4 times the price. So that's great, and that's the price that you pay for being a woman. There is a tax in being female. So there are so many other examples that I see show up on a day-to-day basis. The belief that as soon as a woman has a baby, her business takes a back seat. I've spoken openly in a previous podcast episode about the critique that I've faced from other women, because women have a lot of internalised misogyny. A lot of women do when they're unaware of it, because it's bred into them, and we live with misogyny in like our day-to-day all of the time. That judgment of you're going against what is the standard and norm of being a woman, therefore you are a threat. I'm only a threat because I'm showing you that there's another way and I'm choosing not to conform. And that's something that I come up against quite a lot, is silent judgment in people's line of questioning, where I know exactly where they're going, I know exactly what they're thinking. They know they can't say it overtly, but there's this belief of, why have you not chosen to give up everything to just be a mother? Because surely as a woman, that should be your sole passion and purpose. And we're moving so much back more now towards those like far right traditional values of what a woman's worth is, and we see that heavily present in the manosphere, where the belief is that women exist solely to provide a certain standard of life for the man. Women exist and they get the equivalent of that from the man. So women exist solely to be a wife, to be a mother, to cook, to clean, to run the household, while the man provides the money. Here's the thing about feminism, right? See if that is how you want to live your life. I want you to go and live your life that way. Feminism is not the belief that women have to behave the same as men. And I don't know, I think this is again a term that's really commonly misunderstood across the industry. Feminism is not about women and men being the same. Feminism is about equity. Feminism is about women having the choice that if they do want to be a stay-at-home mum, they are able to meet a partner who can provide, and they can be a stay-at-home mum if that's what they so choose, right? If a woman wants to run a business and be single and never have children, she can do that without societal pressure and expectation that she's doing something wrong or not fulfilling her true passion and her true purpose. I love my husband and I love my daughter, but I would never in a million years measure a woman's worth against her desire to have or not have the same things as me, right? Because that's not feminism. I will empower you and back you to the hilt on your choices as a woman for what you want them to be. But the belief that if we somehow choose something else or we are less, that we are then lesser than, that's where the problem really comes in. And it's because, again, the structure of capitalism depends on these like ideologies, depends on these beliefs in order to be able to exist. What I find really interesting is that men that I know who become fathers, who have businesses, have an expectation of, now I need to work harder than ever to provide for my baby, but I'm criticised for that as a mother. So as a female in business and as the provider for my family, I feel that same drive, right? I want to give my daughter the best possible life. My husband works, he still makes a contribution to the household. At this point in time, he's taking time off to be with Rosa while I run my business. There are a lot of men who would never make that choice, but I married a man who didn't just want to have a wife and a baby, but a man who wanted to be a husband and a father, because that's a huge choice to make. It's a choice that women the world over make every single day. But for a man and a woman to reverse that is controversial. But I find it so interesting that the pressure and expectation that men feel to provide and work harder is celebrated. But for me, I'm criticised for that, right? From my view, the men of the fitness industry have a moral and ethical obligation to be role models. It's not only to their own sons, but like I said, the young men who are finding fitness, those kids who are spending more time in gyms and are exposed to health and fitness more, how are they being nurtured, right? And how are you recognising your contribution to that? How much are your beliefs around your own individualism getting in the way of you seeing this as a collective? Take a minute, men, to think about the role models who have influenced you over your lifetime. What would have happened to you if they weren't present? Where would you have ended up? Like, how susceptible would you have been to this way of thinking if you had easy access to the stuff that young men now have access to watch, and it was regarded and shared as entertainment? If you didn't have male role models to counter those arguments, right, people who you knew and trusted, what might have happened to you? There's a common thread in that people find, a lot of health and fitness coaches find fitness at a difficult period in their life, and fitness gives them something that they felt void or were missing before, and it makes them feel a certain way. It ignites such a passion in them that they make the choice to make it their career, right? That's exactly what fitness should provide as a vehicle. It should not be providing a vehicle into perpetuating this alpha male stereotype. And I see a lot of coaches who do perpetuate this and who subscribe to this. I seen somebody post a while ago, and I actually made content round about it, that if you have abs, you immediately know that a man with abs is disciplined, is powerful, is a hard worker, and he's successful, right? Simply by having abs. Successful in life, not just successful at having abs, successful in life, right? That is you perpetuating that same alpha male incel type thinking, by telling young men that if they don't have abs, they don't have access to being powerful and influential and successful. So they see that as the vehicle, and that opens them up to then being manipulated through these other channels. You have a responsibility to make sure that that narrative is squashed. And I see way too many male coaches now actually perpetuating that because it makes them money. Right? They know that it's easy again to manipulate those people through the vehicle of shame and guilt. And I hate when I see male coaches using shame-focused language on out-of-shape men, feeling fat in your clothes, your misses as they find you attractive anymore. I can completely understand that you need to define your message to your audience's pain points to help them connect with the outcome, but help them connect with the fucking outcome. Don't just shame them. Like, if you want men to feel empowered in their decision making and empowered through fitness, why are we trying to create empowerment through shame? Right? This is how vulnerable young men end up in these positions. And what I see happen now more and more and more is that as this kind of alpha male rhetoric gets louder and louder and louder, blaming and shaming women starts to become a huge focus of this. Women who are also trying to exist and succeed in this space now come under this level of critique that men don't come under, right? Because if you're an alpha male showing your abs and topless at a High Rocks, people go, oh, cracking rig, mate, you're in great shape, you're looking brilliant, right? That's celebrated. People say, like, people then credit that man for what he was able to achieve and what they believe he has as a result of the physique that he shows, okay? Yet for women, she's getting her arse out for content, right? That woman's not celebrated for her physique in the same way that that man is, right? She's getting her arse out for content, but we don't ask, why is the woman doing that? Why does she feel that that was her only option? Why do these women who are skilled, experienced and competent and have the same level of knowledge as these men, why do they feel the need to use their body as a commodity in order to be able to sell a product? Why are we not asking that question? And again, what's interesting from that documentary is that they spoke about the belief of these men in the manosphere was that women are born with their commodity. So one of the biggest beliefs that they run on is that because women are born with what they believe is like a sexual commodity and that they have their body to offer a man, they then don't need to go and develop any further knowledge or skill. They can just sell their body, right? But then when women believe that, this is what happens. So when that's the narrative that's pushed and peddled onto women, that's your worth and that's your value, why are you surprised when they behave in accordance with that? Why are we criticising women for doing what they need to do to also survive in this same system, right? There's been research, I'll cite all of the papers from the research that I speak about. I'll cite all the papers below. There's been research analysing the credibility of social media fitness influencers that found that physical attractiveness and appearance played a stronger role in audience responses to female influencers, while professional expertise mattered more for male influencers. So again, men are credited for their professional knowledge coupled with their physique. Their physique is the evidence that they have that knowledge, whereas for women, it all comes down to attractiveness and appearance, right? That then is just perpetuated as an ideology that's what has to happen, yet we're criticised for it. How does that make any sense, right? 47.8% of women report comparing their bodies to social media idealistic bodies versus only 9.9% of men, right? The shift away from fitness coach to influencer has changed the shape of this industry dramatically, and that's what I believe has given vehicle to these dangerous viewpoints that are now being perpetuated by many fitness coaches, is that as we've started to move into this influencer-centric space, there's too much crossover. The role of a coach has now become so diluted that people see the influencer route as the way to get what they actually want: more engagement, more views, more eyes, and they will do anything that they need to do in order to be able to get it. And we've seen that really present in that documentary. There is a strong parallel between that happening there and that happening now in the fitness industry, where we see people humiliate themselves in the name of content, right? We are all playing that game of needing engagement, needing views, having to capture people's attention in what is a very, very noisy world. But my question is, why are we criticising women who are doing the exact same thing that men are doing? They're doing it in a different way. They've been told that that is their commodity, yet we still criticise them for it. That's the patriarchy in action, and that is the dangerous narrative that I think is fueling this sense of manosphere within the fitness industry. I think that we really need to consider and listen to more women's experiences. What is really interesting to me is that I didn't know that a lot of women had. I knew that women were having these sorts of experiences in the industry because I know that women experience sexism in everyday life all of the time. I didn't know that women were having the experiences that they were having specifically until I asked. And why are me and my female colleagues not speaking about this? Why is this not a topic of conversation? Why are we not speaking about the sexist mentors, the way that we have been ostracised as a result of our gender? Like, this is an anecdotal, piece of information, but I was hired to work in a mentorship in this industry for what I thought was my knowledge and skill set, because I'm one of the very few people, I'm the only one that I know that has the level of knowledge and qualification that I do on coaching as a specification. I thought I was being hired for my knowledge and expertise, and I later found out that it was because they needed a woman on the team so that their female clients felt more seen. Now, you might listen to that and think, why is that a bad thing, right? The reason that is a bad thing is they didn't consider my knowledge and expertise first, right? They said, we need a woman, and then they've went, there's a woman who fits the box, let's bring her in. Now, this isn't a case of me saying that there shouldn't be space made for women in the industry. I'm not saying that in the slightest. There does need to be more space made for women in the industry, but that space had to be created for me and approved for me by a man who was then profiting from the fact that I'm a woman, right? It's not on the basis of we need somebody who can fill this knowledge and skill gap and that's the most qualified person to do it. It was, we need to tick a box and we need a woman to tick that box, so let's put her in there. That's patriarchy. My camera is overheating and that's why it's cutting out, so it just cut out the first part. I'm going to need to figure out how to edit these two parts together. But anyway, back to what I was saying. What I was saying is that this happens so consistently for women where it's almost like it's tokenism. It's not a genuine appreciation for your knowledge. It's that you fit this box that we need to tick first, and then whatever you can bring after that we'll accept, and you're only ever allowed to go so far. There are, to my knowledge, no female business mentors who specialise in fitness businesses. They are all males. I know some women who do consultancy with some people in the fitness space, but they focus on multiple different industries. I know someone who I think was a female business mentor in the fitness industry who subsequently either left or now works somewhere else. They are predominantly men. There is a reason for that. Please remember that this industry will always value men and see men as knowledgeable above all. It's very, very rare that you will find men who feel led or inspired by a woman, because what sells in this industry is that alpha male persona, right? There is a reason that you see the fitness business mentor space absolutely laden with cigars, steaks, BJJ, like Porsches and yachts and all of these like aggressive displays of wealth and alpha male and power. Every single one of these notable men as well in this space, those big names, all have wives at home who are cleaning their clothes and cooking their food and raising their children and running their homes. And that's why those men have been able to be successful, is because there is a woman behind them keeping their life together that they chose to have functioning so that they can go and do that. Women don't have that. We have an expectation to be the primary caregiver, to fulfill a caregiving role for our families, and as women we do both. But because we're doing both, we don't get the same amount of time and focus to just focus all of our energy and dominate in one area. So those men that you see hustling and grinding often have female partners behind them running their households and raising their kids, and that's why they're able to. There are a couple of mentors in this space who don't subscribe to that ideology, who I do respect and I do hold in high regard, who are men who actually speak on these things and have these conversations and acknowledge their role and contribution that they make as men, and have an intention to make a different contribution and influence these spaces in a different way, which I do genuinely really commend. But again, it's the everyday things that men overlook. They don't have to consider school pickups and drop-offs, nap schedules, meal planning, caregiving to the same extent as female business owners. I'm not saying that they don't parent their children or that they don't contribute to their households, but the expectations and intersections of their roles are very, very different. The fitness industry is dominant with that alpha male provider mentality. So those men are perpetuating that by showing that as the pinnacle of success. If you are a female business owner in the fitness industry and the advice that you are taking from a man is not working, please consider it's because it only works in the context of being a man and that actually it's not applicable to the vast majority of women in this space, okay? Please consider that. The other thing that I wanted to say on that is that like a lot of women I know in this space are their family's main providers, myself included, and often we are forced to reduce our capacity in business when we become mothers in a disproportionate way to our male counterparts. Like I said, men are in that position of being expected to step up and provide more. We're expected to diminish and provide less, reduce the size of our business, let go of income, let go of clients because we're forced to. I've had to, right? Female providers are not celebrated, we're judged. We're continuously assessed against our societal norms and the expectation that we should be able to do it all and that we are somehow making a choice. Whereas when it comes to male providers, they are seen as having no choice. That's what they have to do. That's their role, right? This goes even deeper for women who have different intersections to their identities. So women of colour, women who are from the LGBT community, queer women, trans women, women with disabilities. There are multiple different intersections to identity that make that even harder, right? Because if you are a woman of colour in this industry, you are then subject to racism as well as sexism, right? On top of that, if you're a woman with a disability, you're subject to ableism as well as sexism. All of these intersections make it then even more difficult for women to find space in this industry. So we carve out the space that we know we can take, and very often that's what drives women into that commodification that is expected of them by men, because they are told continuously that's where their value is, right? So we have to consider that for the future of this industry, you have to think bigger than just yourself. Male coaches, you have to consider that you do have a bigger influence than what you might think you do, especially if you have a big audience and a big following. You will not know the young men that are consuming your content because they likely won't reach out to you, they likely won't speak to you, right? I want you to think as a male coach in this industry, whenever you are making content, you are putting a message out there. How would that have influenced you as a young man? Every time you talk about masculinity, how would that have influenced you hearing that as a young person? This is the way that you need to think. Beyond your own sons, your own brothers, your own nephews, you need to think wider here and think about the contribution that you are making to this space. How are you making fitness a vehicle out of this ideology instead of a vehicle in? How are you speaking to men And what are you speaking to them about? How are you making sure that your contribution to this space is leaving it in a better space than you found it? And how do you show these young men that the same route into fitness that you found through passion, through purpose, through drive, is possible for them to access in a way that fulfills their life, instead of drives them further into an ideology that promises them they'll escape their loneliness when actually it only increases it? We all seen the dangers for our daughters that exist as more and more men influence young men into this way of thinking in the world. I am terrified when I think about the society that my daughter's going to grow up in. When I think about the society that I grew up in as a woman, I'm a survivor of abuse, again perpetuated by a man who was allowed to behave however he wanted to behave, with absolutely no criticism, absolutely no male role models telling him not to behave that way, no one influencing, no one giving him guidance or showing him another way to be. That's the lived reality of that. How much longer are you going to make a contribution to that without recognising the responsibility that you have to change this narrative? I think I've said everything that I want to say on this. I don't know how long this has been. I think I've hit the majority of the points that I wanted to hit. There was actually so much more that I want to say, and I could talk about this subject for a really, really long time, but I think the key takeaway of this whole thing for me is for male coaches to consider that just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and think about your responsibility beyond your personal gain. Yes, you have a responsibility to your family around how you run your business, but you also have a wider responsibility to this industry as a whole and to the community spaces that are built within it. Let's continue to build and nurture community spaces as an alternative for young men to the things that they're finding themselves in, and change this narrative before it becomes irreversible. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and please have a conversation with me. If you disagree with me, talk to me, let's have a debate, let's have a conversation, ask me questions. You will not offend me. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody, especially men who want to understand more about this topic. But I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.